Brittany, reaching out into the northwest almost as if the land itself yearns towards Avalon. The name, a reminder of her origins in a time well before the Franks ever set foot in Gaul, origins which predate the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Ancient traditions, which includes the Breton language, Bretonic, have been preserved for nearly 1700 years, the only remaining culture keeping the flame of the Celtic language alive on continental Europe. The Breton are a key piece in understanding the identity, history, and mythology of the Brittonic peoples and the Celts in general, and these are their origins. The name of Brittany and Breton are quite obviously related to that of Britain and the Britons. It's a name cognate with the Gaelic word cruchan, from the Proto-Celtic crit, meaning to make or create. The Britons referred to themselves as the fabricators or the artisans, quite in keeping with the Celtic cultural focus on art and the creative classes which hold even in their mythology. Another name for the region since the Roman period was Armorica, which is from Celtic ar, meaning against or on, and mori, the sea. In medieval Welsh, Llydaw was the name for Brittany, which appears to be from an earlier Litavis, meaning the wide land, which may have been the original Brythonic word for the continent as opposed to the islands of Britain and Ireland. The Breton, as their name indicates, identified as Britons. This proves that Britain or British is a true ethnic identity of the native Iron Age population of the island. But as I address in another video, because the Gaelic word cruchan and pryden are cognate, the ethnic identifier must in fact date to at least before the split between Brythonic and Goidelic language branches, meaning that people in Britain were identifying as Britons, at least probably since the very early Iron Age. The Welsh and Cornish also knew themselves and were known as British, but they would also develop another term in the face of the Anglo-Saxon assault, combroges, effectively meaning countrymen or comrades. This became Cumbri, as in Cumbria in northwest Britain, and Cymru, as in Wales or the Welsh. The native language of the Breton is also agreed to be a Brythonic origin, related to that of Welsh, Cornish, and Cumbric, and more distantly, Pictish. Yet when, how, and why the Brythonic tongue came to be spoken in Gaul is much less clear. We will get to the bottom of that question shortly. Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. And because I spend so much time writing and researching, I end up sitting a lot, much more than I should. But if your job entails you to sit, it's important to have a proper chair to do it in. Now that's why I'm so glad that my friends at Flexispot have sent me this C7 Max. So one of the great features about this chair is its customizability. So the head will raise, but also the entire back will raise easily and can lower again easily. There is also a great lumbar support here. It moves when you rest against it. This chair, despite being extremely robust, is exceptionally light. And right here on the floors, I have carpet here. It just glides over this carpet. Also, look at this. This footrest is great, easy to use, goes right under my table here. Now, some chairs are good for work and some chairs are good only to relax in, but this chair is customized for both. It's really amazing, these armrests, and they're great for this table because You see the height of this table here? If you have your armrest down here, it's not very convenient. For this, you could just raise it up to the height that you want and find that perfect level for you. But if you want to kick back and relax, somewhere you can literally fall asleep. You can slide up the seating position and sit traditional Celtic style. Now, if you use my code C730, you'll get $30 off this chair right now. There'll be a link in the description and the comments below, so be sure to check out Flexispot for the chair that's meant for you. By 2200 BC, the descendants of the Bell-Beaker settlers in Brittany established a unique material culture known as the Armorican tumulus culture. As the name suggests, they built large tumuli for their honored dead. There are over 1,000 such tumuli in Lower Brittany alone. Now, this may have been influenced by the earlier megalithic culture in the region, who constructed the so-called St. Michael tumulus, the largest of its kind on continental Europe. The occasional burial of children in such an honored fashion shows that their social status was being inherited, proof of a defined hierarchy. They maintained very close connections with their British cousins across the Channel, known as the Wessex culture. And this relationship was so close that it's very likely that they were part of a common Bell-Beaker linguistic continuum. In other words, they spoke the same pre-Celtic language spoken in Britain during the early and middle Bronze Age. Their elites likely engaged in cross-channel marriages to reinforce alliances, and they acted as one of the primary intermediaries in the European-wide tin trade of Cornwall and Devon. But they likewise had tin deposits of their own, making them a valuable player. They imported copper from mines in Iberia, showing their extensive connections far to the west. Their interest in extended trade networks may have spurred the development of map-making, which is why the oldest known map in Europe was found in Brittany, dating to around 1800 BC. While the geographical map hasn't changed much, the linguistic map of what is now France would have looked radically different. Pre-Indo-European languages related to modern Basque were still spoken throughout central and western France during the Middle Bronze Age. Around 1300 BC, Proto-Celts from Central Europe were expanding westward from their core in southern Germany, Austria, Czechia, and western Slovakia. They possessed some of the most sophisticated military technology of the age, and were organized not just into warrior bands fit for raiding, but large-scale armies. By the late Bronze Age, the Celts were by far the most powerful ethnos in Europe, and they set about redrawing the entire ethno-linguistic map in a way not to be equaled until their late Iron Age successors, the Romans. That strength came not only from military might of berserk warriors, but from a sophisticated cultural package that spread not only the genetics of the Celts, but their language and ideas. Long before any Proto-Celt landed on the shores of Britain or marched into Brittany, they were well aware of the importance of both. The Bronze Age economy of Europe relied on exports of tin coming out of Cornwall, Devon, and Brittany, and those of Brittany played a key role in its continental trade. Rather than being randomly invaded by a gradually expanding Proto-Celtic polity, it's possible that they were targets of intentional invasion precisely because of their economic importance. Between 1100 and 850 BC, Celts migrating from their core regions in the east would flow into Armorica and Britain. The exact genetic impact on Armorica is not known, but it is now believed that this Central European Celtic ancestry made up nearly half of the ancestry of those in southern Britain by the Iron Age. The exact genetic impact on Armorica appears to have been similar to that of Britain. Recent genetic studies have shown something else, which was less expected. Not only was continental Celtic DNA flowing into Britain, but British DNA was also flowing out of Britain into Europe. This outward migration was strongest along the Channel in places like Brittany, but could be found as far away as southern Germany, showing that there really was a type of pan-Celtic elite network which facilitated movement within their cultural zone. Now, this close connection between Britain and Armorica would continue throughout the Iron Age. Coastal regions of Gaul would be the most likely to have spoken a dialect of Gaulish closest to Brythonic. They were far closer to Cornwall than they were to Austria or even southern Gaul. Furthermore, when they first enter into written history, they were intimately connected to the Britons. Julius Caesar said, "These Veneti exercise by far the most extensive authority over all the sea coast in those districts, for they have numerous ships in which it is their custom to sail to Britain, and they excel the rest in the theory and practice of navigation." Moreover, when the Veneti were resisting Rome, it was the Britons who came to their military aid, fighting alongside the Gauls of Armorica. This was even used as one of the justifications by Caesar for launching his failed invasion of Britain. Roman writer Tacitus had the following to say when recounting the identity of the British and the Gauls. "The peoples nearest to Gauls are correspondingly like them. Perhaps the original strain persists. Perhaps it is climatic conditions that determine physical type in lands that converge from opposite directions on a single point. On a general estimate, however, we may believe that it was Gauls who took possession of the neighboring island. In both countries, you will find the same ritual, the same religious beliefs. There is no great difference in language, and there is the same hardihood in challenging danger, the same subsequent cowardice in shirking it. But the Britons show more spirit. They have not yet been softened by protracted peace." Now, Tacitus was well acquainted with Britain. His father-in-law was its governor for a time, and so he knew what he was talking about. The language of Britain and the language of those in Gaul who dwelt near Britain was not strongly distinguished. Julius Caesar commented that the Druids of Gaul used to travel to Britain to study, and this remark itself shows that Brythonic was just one end of a dialectical continuum, which included at least northern Gaul. When we combine this with the fact that Armoricans likely had families in Britain, constantly traded back and forth, and had their closest military allies in Britain, they may also have shared an identity and a language. If so, this completely upends the standard narrative of the origin of the Bretons, though it remains an unproven possibility due to the lack of more concrete evidence. At the time of the Roman occupation, a number of tribes are known to have held power over different regions of Armorica. The Veneti, who were along the southwestern coast, were perhaps the strongest, or at least made the most impression in history due to leading the struggle against Rome. Their tribal name is not a rare one in Europe, and seemingly goes back to a West Indo-European origin, as it's found in northern Italy and in the Baltics. Yet, far more relevant is that it's also found in Wales, cognate with the origins of the name Gwynedd, and in Ireland, cognate with Finne, an archaic word referring to the kin, race, or tribe, from Proto-Celtic Wenya, meaning kindred. In Gaulish, the Veneti were called the Wenetoi. In early medieval Brythonic, a G was inserted before all these initial W sounds, and eliminated endings which would make it Gwenet, and eventually the softened T to a th, giving us modern Gwynedd. The Ossismi dwelt in the northwestern tip of the peninsula, the Namnetes between the lower Loire and the Semnon River, north of the Pictones, also suspiciously similar to the Picts of Scotland, and the Coriosolites, whose name comes from Corios, the Proto-Indo-European word for a warrior band. During the Roman period, though there are some Gallo-Roman estates built up, Armorica had the least Roman influence of all of Gaul. Armorican ships, as noted by Julius Caesar, were impressive and continued to play an important role in maritime trade throughout the Roman period. Some towns were established, such as the Civitas Corrisolitum, where a massive pre-Christian religious complex existed known as the Temple of Mars. Though the god certainly had a pre-Roman identity, it was one of the largest temple complexes in Roman Gaul. One surviving portion of it has 10-meter-high walls. Yet Armoricum remained relatively rural and secluded from the broader Roman society. This helped preserve native traditions there longer. It would have been a prime candidate for the last remaining location for the Celtic tongue spoken in Gaul. And it's quite possible that the Celtic language there never ceased being spoken. Even if we accept that the Gaulish language of Armorica was distinct from Brythonic, it may have been a softened transition from one to the other without any intermediary period of vulgar Latin. As the 4th century AD came to a close, the sun was setting on the Western Roman Empire. Yet one final event in Roman Britain would make a massive, lasting impact in British legends and world history. The long-running theory is that migrants fleeing the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain ended up crossing the Channel into Brittany, perhaps starting around 430 AD. This theory was supported by our earliest British source, Gildas, who commented on how some Britons had crossed the sea to escape the Saxons. In support of this, a recent genetic study on the population of Brittany has detected an insular British genetic admixture, not found anywhere else in France, confirming that British migration did take place there. Yet the admixture amount is not estimated to be very high, perhaps only between 5 to 15% according to the study. Yet because the underlying genetic similarity between Armorica, Britain, and Ireland, admixture estimates may be an underestimation. My assumption is that the real figure of this admixture is probably double this number. Yet the narrative of Brittany, as a result of a random migration, is inaccurate. Medieval Brittany was divided into several regions. A number of the names are of British origin, like the Domnonia, cognate with Dumnoni of Devon, proving that at least the local political structures in medieval Brittany were the result of extended tribal networks from Cornwall, not random migrations. This speaks against the idea that people resettled there primarily to flee the Saxons, as Cornwall and Devon maintained political independence until the late 9th century. But if it was not only the result of random refugee flows from Britain, then when and how did all this happen? Born into the Theodosian dynasty on their Galatian estates in northern Spain, Magnus Maximus rose through the ranks of the imperial army, becoming a general and eventually receiving a deployment to Britain in 380, where he is credited with defeating an attack by the Picts and the Saxons. With his star rising within the army, and his recent success in Britain acting as a catalyst, he was proclaimed emperor by the troops in Britain, and quickly began assembling forces which would help him sweep to power on the continent. To accomplish this monumental task, he would require troops, many of them. Though it's believed he did not strip the entire Roman garrison of Britain, it's likely that he took many, as well as engaged in a widespread mobilization campaign, enlisting the support of local British aristocrats and youths who were outside of the formal Roman army, the warrior bands of the less Romanized tribes of Cornwall and Wales. Of this event, the earliest of our British sources, Gildas, remarked, "After this, Britain is left deprived of all her soldiery and armed bands, and her cruel governors, and of the flower of her youth, who went with Maximus, but never again returned. And utterly ignorant as she was of the art of war, groaned in amazement for many years under the cruelty of two foreign nations, the Scots from the northwest and the Picts from the north. Once in Gaul, Magnus Maximus and his British troops would deal a defeat to Emperor Gratian and his forces around Paris. Gratian fled the battle, but was later killed near Lyon. Once Maximus had deposed Gratian, legends support that he deployed forces to Armorica to depose those loyal to Gratian and his brother Valentinian. In legendary history, the figure leading those British troops was Conan Meriadoc. And yes, Tolkien borrowed his name. And he would be granted control over Armorica by Maximus, and go on to found the royal house of Rohan. Yes, also borrowed by Tolkien. A legendary account of this survives in the Welsh tale, The Vision of Maxen Wledig, the Welsh name for Magnus Maximus. The emperor then said unto Conan and Adaon, Lords, he said, I have now had possession of the whole of my empire. This host give I unto you to vanquish whatever region you may desire in the world. So they set forth and conquered lands and castles and cities, and they slew all the men, but the women they kept alive. And thus they continued until the young men that had come with them were grown grey-bearded, from the length of time that they were upon this quest. Then spoke Conan unto Adaon his brother. Whether wilt thou rather, he said, tarry in this land, or go back to the land whence thou didst come from? Now he chose to go back to his own land, and many with him. But Conan tarried there with the other part, and dwelt there. And they took counsel, and cut out the tongues of the women, lest they should corrupt their speech. And because of the silence of the women from their own speech, the men of Armorica are called Britons. From that time there came frequently and still comes that language from the island of Britain. Now the account is obviously a legendary one and should not be taken literally. The cutting of the tongues is actually to explain a linguistic continuity. One of the Welsh names for Brittany is Llydaw, which they explained as meaning half-tongue, so the story was crafted around this folk etymology, but which actually is an ancient word for the continent. The account is echoed by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who said that after Maximus conquered Armorica, he installed Conan to found Britannia Minor. A number of saints' lives written in Brittany record the same myth about the founding by Conan. Maximus gained power over all Gaul, but Italy and Spain remained held by Valentinian II, brother of Gratian. The struggle persisted for the next 5 years, but eventually Magnus Maximus was defeated. Despite his short life as emperor, his impact on Britain was massive. He became a key figure in later British legends concerning the origins of Brittany. By 410, the empire left Britain, but not only Britain, with Germanic barbarians moving unchecked across massive swaths of Roman territory. Only portions of Gaul were still under Roman control. The Britons, at least according to legend, had already established themselves there, but their relationship to later emperors following Maximus is not clear. Sidonius Apollinaris was a poet and diplomat from Gaul. Born in 430 AD, he became a bishop of Clermont in 469 and helped defend the city against the Visigoths. In 468, he wrote about a secret letter that was intercepted, which implored the king of the Visigoths, Euric, not to make peace with Rome, but to attack the Britons north of the Loire and to divide all of Gaul between the Visigoths and the Burgundians. This letter is the earliest historical mention of the Britons in Armorica. By 468, the Visigoths had secured Spain and held much of western France, right up to the Loire River across from Armorica, the population of which was being identified as Britons. They had, however, as recently as 451, united in order to repel the attacks by the Hunnic Empire, dealing them a decisive defeat in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, in which Armorican bowmen played a critical role. Yet by 468, the Visigoths were again looking to make further moves in Gaul, and Armorica was in their sights. With the Visigoths from the west and the other Germanic tribes from the east crushing Roman Gaul like a vice, Emperor Anthemius did what to many would seem unimaginable. The Roman emperor called on Britain for aid, and more marvelous still, she answered. The king of the Britons who answered this call was named Rioamus, a name meaning great king in Brythonic. Surprisingly, he doesn't appear in any British histories or legends, but we know for a fact that he existed, because a direct communication with him is preserved in the letters of Sidonius. Having received the emperor's plea for aid, and likely wishing to thwart the intended attack on Armorica, Rioamus assembled a British army of 12,000 and made for war. But the historical question is where these British troops were actually located, in Britain or in Armorica. While we have almost no details about Rioamus, to be able to have mustered an army of 12,000 at this time was not at all insignificant. He was likely an inspiring figure. His native Brythonic name indicates that he was from a largely unromanized part of Britain, likely from the west, probably only nominally a Christian. His actual religious views and practices would have been very eclectic, much like early Arthurian traditions. Yet the deployment of Rioamus does not easily match with the established historical timeline in Britain. The Gallic Chronicle of 452 states that in 441, the British provinces, even at this time, have been handed over across a wide area through various catastrophes and events to rule of the Saxons. Procopius around 550 reported that Britain was settled by three nations: Angles, Frisians, shout out to History with Hilbert, and Britons. The timing for King Rioamus's deployment of forces to counter the Visigoths seems almost impossible to square with the commonly accepted timeline of Britain. 493 is a generally accepted date for the Battle of Baddon Hill, based on Gildas' account. This is the battle where the native Britons managed to deal a serious defeat to the Saxons and establish a temporary calm where the Britons maintained the upper hand. A deployment of a large military force led by a powerful king from Britain into Gaul would seem best to correspond to this period. Neither Gildas nor Nennius named the king who was responsible for this great victory, though later traditions would name him Arthur. Some believe that King Rioamus may be the real man who legends of King Arthur grew up around. Yet possibly, Rioamus may have been a king of the Britons on both sides of the Channel. He, along with his 12,000 Britons, traveled by ship, perhaps crossing from Britain to Armorica, and then traveling up the lower river into the territory of the Bituriges, sometime between 468 and 470. This corresponds to the letter by Sidonius, speaking in 468, as well as another comment in a separate letter in the same year, which speaks of our Armorican petition is advancing, which may reference the military coordination between the Britons of Armorica and the Romans. The Roman historian Jordanes explains. Now Euric, king of the Visigoths, perceived the frequent change of Roman emperors and strove to hold Gaul in his own right. The emperor Anthemius heard of it and asked of Britons for aid. Their king, Rioamus, came with 12,000 men into the state of the Bituriges by the way of ocean, and was received as he disembarked from his ships. Euric, king of the Visigoths, came against them with an innumerable army, and after a long fight, he routed Rioamus, king of the Britons, before the Romans could join him. So when he had lost a great part of his army, he fled with all his men he could gather together, and came to the Burgundians, a neighboring tribe then allied to the Romans. But Euric, king of the Visigoths, seized the Gallic city of Arverna, for the emperor Anthemius was now dead. The ultimate defeat of King Rioamus's forces appears to have taken place around Bourges. Gregory of Tours remarks, "The Brittany were driven from Bourges by the Goths, and many were slain at the village of Deols." Rioamus and his surviving men managed to escape into the territory of the Burgundians near Lyon. In 472, Sidonius wrote to King Rioamus, addressing him as a good friend, with a polite request for him to intervene to prevent the Britons from luring away all the slaves. This may suggest that Rioamus and his men were camped in the region of Lyon at the time. What the ultimate fate of the king and his men were, we cannot say. The emperor who had summoned his aid was murdered in a coup in 472, followed by a string of failed emperors who didn't last a year apiece, until the fall of Romulus Augustus in 476, which generally marks the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire and the start of the medieval period. The story of Rioamus shows the significant settlement and influence of the Britons in Gaul already by 478, which strongly suggests that their settlement there long predated the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain, in accordance with legends. When migration due to Anglo-Saxon conquest did begin, people fled to Brittany specifically because their kin already ruled there. Shortly after the defeat of Rioamus, the Bretons were forced to defend themselves against the Franks as they swept to power across Gaul. According to Jordanes, the Britons were able to hold them off in battle, but eventually agreed to accept a type of vassalage through a marriage alliance. Procopius mentions that people from Britain were continuing to enter Gaul and being allowed to settle in barren lands by the Franks, who in turn hoped to gain influence and power in Britain. A little-known historical detail with huge consequences to be addressed in a future video. One of the earliest known rulers of importance was Warach. He ruled Gwynedd. He is said to be the father of Trephine, an important saint of Brittany, wife of another historically important ruler, Connemar, chief of the Domnoni in the mid-500s. He may have ruled on both sides of the Channel, being king over lands in Britain and Brittany, as he is described as ruling over a people of 4 languages, and was named by the Franks as the protector of the British Channel. He's later demonized in legends of saints, said to be a tyrant, probably because he maintained pagan views. Saint Samson was said to have petitioned the Frankish king Hildebert to set aside his recognition of Connemar. He was a strong ruler, but seen by the Franks as a count or prefect. His doom came when Hlothar I took over following his brother Hildebert's death, and his rebellious son Hram fled to Armorica and sought the protection of Connemar. A battle ensued, in which Connemar was killed. Saint Samson of Dol, who lived between 485 and 565, is one of the earliest British saints and is honored on both sides of the Channel. His hagiography is likewise one of the earliest recorded and preserves critical information about early Celtic customs, specifically a Brythonic grain harvest festival, which corresponds to Gaelic Lunasa, which involved horse racing and a play which had an idol of the god and a pillar stone situated on top of a hill. Its main concern was the protection of crops and the community from a beast that destroyed both plague and drought, a common theme found in saints in Ireland celebrated at the same time. The god battled numerous dragons, the Brythonic equivalent of St. George, and he likely carries on the primary aspect of the Celtic god worship during the festival, which is near the same time as his feast day. Brittany was able to maintain a relative independence throughout the Merovingian period and the later Kingdom of France. Various treaties and royal submissions were made, but the native Britons continued to rule. In wars with the Franks, they even managed to extend their lands for a time to include parts of what are now Normandy, and arguably to establish a formal independent kingdom for a period. From the 11th to the 16th century, they were an independent duchy, but through an intentional plan by the French monarchy, through marriage and through war, By 1536, the titles of Duke of Brittany and King of France became merged. Brittany was formally absorbed into the Kingdom of France. Yet though the independent political existence of Brittany was dead, the Breton people were not. Much continued as it had, with local Breton elites still largely managing the affairs of Brittany, and a Breton parliament was established in 1553. Yet though many might expect that the French Revolution of 1789 would have brought the liberation of the Breton, it was instead the biggest blow landed against them in their entire history. The revolution smashed the province of Brittany and subdivided it into 5 departments, removing its political independence. The regional parliament was shuttered. Many Bretons fought with the royalists and Catholic insurgency, which was met with brutal force. All Breton privileges that had existed were eliminated almost overnight. Revolutionary liberals sought to completely unify France as one nation, with one identity and one language. At that time, arguably only a minority of people in France spoke what is considered standard French. A proposal was made to establish it as the sole language of the Republic, with the intention to destroy all regional languages and identities. By the time public school became mandatory in 1881, this had had a devastating impact on the language. In response, a Breton national movement began. A topic for another time. The roots of the Bretons in Armorica go back at least 1700 years, though arguably they carry with them not only the legacy of the Britons, but the Gauls before them, the primary ancestors of the vast majority of the people of France, carrying on the Celtic tongue and culture. Like Arthur and St. Samson, the Bretons have heroically struggled throughout their history against countless challenges. They remain in that land of their fathers, watching the sun set somewhere in the west, near Avalon. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to check out the C7 chair by Flexispot. There's a link in the description below. If you use the code C730, you'll get $30 off the chair, which is already on a big discount right now. And consider supporting me on Patreon, PayPal, or through YouTube Super Stickers. Your support really helps me to continue to make content like this, and also to continue working on my many writing projects, which will hopefully be coming very shortly. Thank you all for your support, and as always, stand tall.